Essentially and very simply, DDEX is a standards development organization. And what we do is to develop standards to enable the efficient communication of data up and down the music industry value chain. And we do this in three areas. Firstly, the message formats. That is the computer messages that you exchange between your businesses, which are set out in a standard way, so that when your business partner receives the message, they will know what sort of data they should expect to see in individual fields. We then develop choreographies in relation to those messages. And what that means is we set down the triggers that people should be aware of before sending messages, or triggers to send messages, and similarly what to expect and when to respond to a message. And then finally, we actually develop standards that set out the protocols for the actual physical mechanism by which the messages are exchanged. For most of the time during the digital music industry growth from around 2000, most messages have been exchanged by putting a message on an FTP site, a secure FTP site, and then sending an email to somebody to go and download it. A lot of that still goes on, but gradually the industry is moving towards more automated exchange of messages using web services. And so our standards are developing to meet that expectation. So as I've said, our mission is to develop message formats, develop choreographies, and define the communication protocols. There are two other areas that we work in, mostly in the first of those two with other standards organizations. We aim to try and improve identification. As you know, a lot of entities in the music industry have unique identifiers, particularly sound recordings and musical works. And so we work with the standard organizations responsible for those standards to find ways of improving the quality of them. And so we work very closely with CISAC in Paris in respect of ISWCs, with IFPI in respect of ISRCs, and then more recently with the International Standard Name Identifier standard to identify parties, individuals and entities, companies and so forth. So we work with them because we're able to sort of represent the entire music industry, because the membership here is very much all the way from studio companies who are providing software and services to studios all the way to DSPs. All of the names there are the ones that you would expect to see. Then there is a general objective, which is to try and improve metadata quality and consistency. This is, as you all know, not a trivial task, and as some would say, it's been going on for at least 2 decades anyway, and will continue to do so. A lot of the work around metadata improvement, quality and consistency is done by individual companies. But what DDEX is able to do is to kind of funnel all of these ideas and issues, and then let other companies within DDEX know plans as they are going on, and the activities that individual companies are doing. And so by that, you sort of create a virtuous circle of activities between companies to try and improve the metadata situation. So this is DDEX's famous tube map. For those of you who are based in the UK, you will recognize that this looks a little bit like the London Tube diagram, in style at least. And yes, we did get a license to use it. But what this tries to show is all of the types of companies that you would expect to see in the music industry, again, from studios to DSPs and everything in between. And then each of the different colored lines represents a standard that DDEX has created and which is used to exchange information between those different types of business partners. So you can see there the green line on the left, from studios to record companies, is about getting studio data to record companies as early as possible in the creative process. I'm not going to go through all of these because that on its own is more or less a day's seminar, but I just want to highlight some of them. So the one that's probably most known to the industry at large is the Electronic Release Notification Message Suite, or ERN. And this is devised to enable record companies and distributors to pass data to DSPs about releases and sound recordings or music videos, cover art images, and so on, where possible, musical works data in the sound recordings, and most importantly, the commercial terms that are relevant to the use of those particular releases. The important thing about ERN is that it supports all kinds of business models. It's not constrained by, for example, just a download environment or a streaming environment, but almost anything you can think of, and deals with audio, audiovisual, and can be applied to any territory. There's a lot of chat. Do I need to worry about that? Okay. Sorry, just to finish on ERN. ERN is probably the most ubiquitous standard that we've got, and with one exception that I know of, I don't believe any record company or distributor uses an alternative standard for this purpose, literally across the world. So that one is very much ingrained in the industry. Then we have the digital sales report message suite, which sort of kind of does what it says on the tin, or you could analyze it and say it doesn't. But basically what this is about is to enable licensees, usually DSPs, to report to owners of rights, whether they're musical works or sound recording rights, the usage and sales of those entities on the service. There are different profiles within that standard to represent different types of services, because obviously the way the data needs to be communicated may vary according to the nature of the actual business model or service that is being offered. And again, the most popular of these listed there is the basic audio profile, which is used for all the streaming services, as you would imagine, and UGC, which is obviously growing more and more in importance across the industry. Very much related to DSR is the claim detail message suite, which enables owners of rights or administrators of rights in musical works to make claims to the DSPs as an answer to the usage reports they've received in the format of a digital sales report. And this is very much, again, a virtuous circle that we're trying to create here for that community, whereby DSPs can send sales and usage information to rights owners, and then rights owners can make claims back. In addition, the CDM standard also includes what we call discrepancy messages. And this can enable DSPs, if they find something in a claim that doesn't make sense or doesn't add up, then they can send this discrepancy message back to the licensor, in other words, the owner or administrator of the musical works, and then they can begin a conversation about what's right and what's wrong. DSR is fairly well embedded in the industry. CDM is beginning. At the moment, we're still waiting for the first live implementation But DDEX has been meeting in Arlington all week, and there were a lot of conversations during the week about how and when implementations relating to CDM might take place. So those are some of the important standards that I wanted to draw your attention to. And obviously, we will be spending our time on the MWDR standards, and you'll see an extract from the tube map that shows the sorts of entities that are likely to be exchanging those messages. Another thing in relation to the standards, which is really important, is identifying the DDEX data dictionary, which underpins everything we do when it comes to the standardization of the messages. The DDEX data dictionary is almost the lingua franca of the music industry now. If you don't talk DDEX, then it's going to be difficult for you to receive or send data to your business partners. And so DDEX has very often been compared to a sort of language converter. So if you have two companies who've built their systems, their data models, the way in which their databases communicate with each other in different ways, it's quite difficult for them to communicate in a standardized way. What DDEX does is allow the sender to translate data into DDEX, and then for the recipient to take that DDEX feed and translate it into their own world. And so it kind of acts as a translator between companies. The data dictionary is a huge thing. It contains the semantics, terms, and definitions for every single term that DDEX uses, and there are thousands of them. And the other thing it contains is what we call examples of common composites. I've talked a lot about sound recordings or musical works or parties. Those sorts of entities have a number of data points that are used to enable the description of a sound recording or a musical work. And we call these composites, these various data points that are held together. Very often there are relationships between the different data points in order to aid understanding. And so all of those sorts of things are contained within the data dictionary, and more importantly, get used consistently across all the standards. So regardless of which standard you may be using, if you want to describe a sound recording, you will use almost certainly the same composite as any other standard. I've kind of talked to that already. So just a little bit about DDEX itself. DDEX is an open not-for-profit membership organization. We have around 150 members at the moment. And as I mentioned earlier on, they represent organizations from right across the value chain. So we have musical work rights owners and administrators, such as music publishers and collective rights organizations for musical works. We have owners and administrators of sound recordings, so labels, distributors, and collective rights organizations for sound recordings and performers. And then we have the digital retailers, the Apples and the Googles and the Amazons of this world. And they sit alongside what we've tended to call technical service providers. There's an increasing number of companies in the industry who provide high-end tech services, mostly to rights owners, but not exclusively, but to players within the industry to help them live in the industry and deal with the complexity of data, the huge volumes of data. Some small companies are simply not in a position to do that. And so using technology service providers is one way of allowing them to participate in the industry. And the last one, again, which I've already mentioned, are companies providing services and software for the studio environment to help capture data about creation as soon as possible in the creative process. As I said, we're a membership organization. We have 3 layers of membership. The first is, or the kind of biggest group is the full members. And full members can attend any DDEX meeting of whatever nature, working group meetings, which is obviously the main thing that drives what we do, bi-yearly plenary meetings, one of which we've just had this week, and an annual meeting, which just deals like an AGM for any other organization. They can provide working group chairs or propose working group chairs. And probably most important, all members, not just full members, are allowed to comment on what we call committee drafts. Committee drafts are the sort of penultimate stage before DDEX actually publishes a standard and then expects it to be implemented. And this is an opportunity where there is a whole month, the committee draft gets published to all of the members, and they then have the opportunity to comment on that committee draft. And then there's a final process of cleanup before the standard gets published to the wider world. As you can see on the left-hand side here, membership fees, annual membership fees are determined by these revenue bands. And we have tried very hard to make sure that there are revenue bands at the lower end of revenue. So the up to 2 million and the 2 million to 5 million, very low fees. And these, we're proud of the fact that something like 30%. Something like 30% of the members who are full members fall into those two categories. So small startups, smaller companies generally are very important to DDEX. It's not just about the multinational companies, of which there are many and they are all represented. But we make sure that everybody has a voice in our discussions. It's not determined by Spotify and Universal Music. There are opportunities for everybody to participate in our discussions. The other two tiers of membership are charter members. They basically get the same benefits as a full member, but able to nominate a board member. The number of those are 21, and we have 21, so there are no spaces there. And then lastly, we have associate members. They are not permitted to participate in our meetings, but they do have access to documentation, and like all members are able to comment on the committee drafts, as I've already mentioned. We do allow them, especially when they first become associate members, to attend a plenary meeting for a fee in the hope that they will see it makes sense to become a full member. And the fee there is $2,675. And if you've remembered the previous slide, you will see that that amount is greater than the two lowest bands for full membership. And that is done on purpose to encourage smaller companies to become full members and get involved in what we're doing. There is a list of our membership on the website, on the member tab at ddex.net. So if you want to have a look at that, please go there. And sort of partway to showing you that, this is a list of the current charter members. On the left, you have the owners, administrators of sound recording rights. So you've got Downtown Music as a distributor. Most of their business is through Fuga and I can't remember the other one they've got, but anyway. And then you've got the three major labels. And you've also got three of the collective rights organizations for producers and performers, PPL, SEPP, and Sound Exchange, who are our hosts today. The middle group are the collective rights organizations or administrators for musical works. 6 of those are collective rights organizations, and we have Cobalt Music as a publisher. And then lastly, the DSPs, and the technology service providers. These are small little companies you may have heard of at some point, like Amazon, Apple, Google, and so on. The other relationships which are important to DDEX are our licensees. You need to take out a license to use the DDEX standards. It doesn't cost anything, but it gives you the right to implement and use the standard. This is merely a way of protecting copyright in the standards. It's not a big deal, and we tend to try and underplay the need for that, but we do very much encourage feedback from our licensees as much as from our members. And then the last grouping is one that is very much growing. We have the concept of liaison organizations, and these tend to be trade associations or other standards bodies with whom we have a common interest. So as I mentioned earlier on, CSAC and IFPI are liaison organizations, and there are something like another dozen or so representing all sort of areas of the business. And now 2 or 3 of them are very much representing creators. And that's becoming increasingly important to us, that we're able to have dialogue with creators as well as legal entities that are part of the business. And we use these relationships to allow us to communicate with their memberships and vice versa. And we provide sort of events like this for liaison organizations to give their members the opportunity to learn more about what we're doing. I've mentioned intellectual property already. Like a lot of standards bodies, in fact, most, there has to be an intellectual property policy because people are bringing their ideas with their company hat on, and therefore technically, if you're a lawyer, certainly, there may be copyright in the ideas or IP in the ideas that are put forward, especially if they subsequently get used. And so we have to have this IP policy. Basically, the way it works is members grant us a license only in respect of stuff that gets into the standards. Everything else, they retain ownership in. And that is a very common approach to the management of intellectual property in the context of standards organizations. It's particularly important for technology companies in the area of patents. I've mentioned already that we have these 3 groups of members, and together they form a sort of a governance that is the way in which the DDEX is run. I've mentioned the charter members provide the members of the board. The board votes on an executive board. So the board basically sets a strategy. The executive board is slightly more hands-on and makes sure that the DDEX Secretariat is fulfilling that strategy, but may help make decisions over tactical activities. And then the charter members and full members provide their representatives from their companies to participate in the plenary and the working groups, the technical working groups. And obviously, the Secretariat has a responsibility for making those activities take place. And then the last thing is a thing we call the technical management group. Again, this is a mixture of representatives from the board and from the plenary. And what that grouping is there for is to try and make sure at a technical level that the standards are all going in roughly the same direction. It's very important that all of our standards have some similarities, even though they are designed for different business purposes. And so the technical management group is there to try and help the Secretariat make sure that happens. The way we operate on a sort of daily basis is not rocket science. It's like most standards bodies. We have a number of technical working groups. I think at the last count, it was 12 or 14. And those groups set the requirements, review proposed solutions, and then through an iterative process, help the Secretariat develop the actual text of the standards. And obviously, most of the time we meet by telephone or Zoom conferences. And we have a number of facilities whereby all the documentation people need is shared. Also, as I mentioned, and has happened this week, we have these 2 plenary meetings per year which involves 3 days of meetings, which we rotate between north and west of North America, east and west, sorry, not north, and Europe. So we're obviously on the East Coast now. We'll be on the West Coast in April and then back in Europe in November. And these plenaries review all of the work of the various working groups, allows everybody to get up to date with what's happening in the various working groups, because individuals simply can't attend everything because they would be on DDEX meetings at least once a day, and probably trying to split themselves in two because some have to be run in parallel. And together they then make recommendations to the board with regard to the technical work and how we move it forward. And occasionally it becomes necessary to have regional or topical meetings, physical meetings, in addition to the plenaries, particularly if a working group's agenda items in terms of work has become too long, and there needs to be a couple of days stuck in a room trying to move the agenda forward. The most important thing about all of this is that DDEX makes decisions based on consensus. Now, consensus doesn't mean unanimity, even if I could say it. We try and get unanimity, in other words, everybody agreeing to everything. But in reality, there's often going to be occasions where, whilst somebody may not be totally happy with the solution, they're not going to make a big issue out of it. And so they sort of shrug their shoulders. On that basis, we have consensus, which we call an absence of sustained opposition. And then briefly, the standards process, as I've sort of indicated, starts with the board assigning a work item to a working group. The working group goes through whatever the issue is and iteratively gets to the point where it can declare a committee draft. All the members can then get the opportunity to review that committee draft. The comments, what we call, I can't remember the name of what we call it, but anyway, the comments that come out of those are viewed by the technical management group. Usually these are just editorial, very, very occasionally, and I can only think of 2 examples in the 17 years that DDEX has been in existence. There may be an issue of a substantive issue in the standards that somebody's not happy with, and then it has to go back to the working group and the process begins again. Once that's done, the board approves the standard and the secretariat publishes it. We are trying at the very least to minimize new versions at least once a year. In actual fact, that's gone further than that, in that we will now only publish a standard if we know that at least 2 companies are on the point of implementing it. So that makes sure that the standard actually has real value, is going to get real implementation, and is just not a document that sits on the shelf gathering dust.